Greetings, candidates, and welcome to the lesson. The subject is financial management. Today we're going to start on a new chapter known as the financing decision. Candidates will recall in our first lesson, we did mention that the finance manager performs four crucial roles, four key roles. One of them being capital budgeting decision, financing decision, working capital decision, and also the dividend policy decisions. Those are the key decisions that the financial manager makes. Today we begin the discussion of the second crucial decision that is expected of a financial manager, that is the financing decision. This chapter is arranged into 5 subtopics. Number 1 is the nature and objectives of the financing decision. Number 2, factors to consider when making financing decisions. Number 3, sources of finances for enterprises. Under the sources of finances for enterprises, we will discuss the internally generated funds and the externally generated funds, the long-term sources, the which include equity, debt, hybrids, lease finance, venture capital, business angel finance, private equity, asset securitization and sale, Islamic finance, and initial coin offerings. We also tackle the medium-term sources such as medium-term loans and hire purchase financing, as well as the short-term sources of finance such as the overdraft, trade credit, issue of commercial papers, accruals, deferred income, and also the characteristics of each source of finance. We will be studying the characteristics of each source of finance. The pros and cons of the various sources of finance will also be covered in the subtopic sources of finances for enterprises. Then in subtopic number 4, we will discuss the evaluation of financing options. Then lastly, there is the methods of issuing ordinary shares. We look at the public issue, the private placement, bonus issue, employee stock option plans, and rights issue. So that is what is expected of you as far as the chapter on the financing decision is concerned. And before we get into the objectives of the financing decisions, I'm going to make a few comments about the financing decisions. Now, candidates, the financing decisions are decisions regarding the methods that are used to raise funds which would be used for making acquisitions. The financing decisions are decisions concerning the liabilities and also the stockholders' equity side of the firm's balance sheet, such as decision to issue bonds. When looking at the financing decisions, candidates, we are considering the right-hand side of the balance sheet, which comprise the capital and also the liabilities. By now, I'm sure you know that there are 2 sides to a balance sheet, the debit side and the credit side. Under financing decisions, we'll be considering the items that appear on the credit side of the balance sheet. So the financing decisions, candidates, involve various factors, and they are the expenditure analysis. They involve raising funds on the most favorable terms possible, and also managing the working capital, such as the inventory, the accounts receivable, and so on. So a finance manager is expected to help the company to raise funds on the most favorable terms possible. And the goals of corporate finance candidates can be achieved only when the corporate investment is financed appropriately. And there has to be what we call the financing mix. Why? Because the financing mix will make an impact on the valuation. And the company should therefore identify what we call an optimal mix of financing. All right? That means the one which results in maximum value. So the finance manager is expected to help the company come up with an optimal mix of financing. For example, if a project is to be financed, the finance manager should be able to tell what will be the proportion of money that will be raised out of debt, what will be the proportion that will be raised out of capital, share capital, and so on. Why? So that the goals of corporate finance can be achieved. And that goal can only be achieved when there is a financing mix, when the results lead to what we call maximum value. And candidates, the sources of finance are usually comprised of combination of debt and equity financing. And we all know that a project that is financed through debt results in a liability and obligation. If a project is to be raised through debt, then that debt will result into a liability and an obligation. And when a project is financed through equity, it is less risky. It is what? It is less risky with respect to cash flow commitments. When a company raises money through equity, then that company does not have to be servicing loans every month. All right? So the cost of equity is always higher than the cost of debt. The equity candidates financing may result in what we also call an increased hurdle rate. So the management of the company must match the financing mix to the asset that is being financed. And one of the theories as to how the firm makes their financing decisions is the pecking order theory. The pecking order theory. Pecking order theory. This is one of the theories. And what is the pecking order theory all about? Candidates, under this theory, under the pecking order theory, the firm should avoid external financing if it has availability of internally generated funds. Pecking order. The firm should avoid external financing like debt if the firm can make use of, say, retained earnings, internally generated financing. If the firm can raise money internally under pecking order, the firm should avoid external financing. The firm also, candidates, should avoid equity financing if they have an option of debt financing which is lower, okay, which has a lower interest rate. If a firm has a lower, can raise debt at a lower interest rate, the firm should go for debt financing if the interest rate is lower. I also mentioned that under pecking order, a farm should opt for internal sources. If a farm has internal sources of finance like retained earnings, then the farm should exhaust the internal sources before the external, because generally the external sources of funds is cheaper than the external sources. So the pecking order is one of the theories that can help a finance manager make the financing decisions. And another theory which can help a finance manager to make financing decision is what we call the trade-off theory. The trade-off theory. What is this theory all about? Now, the trade-off theory is where firms are assumed to trade off what we call tax benefits. They assume to do what? To trade off tax benefits with what we call the bankruptcy costs. Bankruptcy the firm can do what? Can trade off the tax benefits with bankruptcy costs when making financing decisions. Bankruptcy costs. Now, having made the few comments on the financing decisions, let's now move to study the nature and objectives of financing decision. Nature and objectives of the financing decision. Now, candidates, the nature of financial decisions vary from one firm to the other. And it may be also different for the same firm over a period of time. It may also be what? Different for the same nature of firms over a period of time. So it's important to note that the nature of financial decisions vary from one firm to the other. And even the firms which may seem the same, the nature of financial decisions can also vary over time. And the reason is that the nature of financial decisions is influenced by prevailing microeconomics and macro conditions. Macro and micro conditions. The what? The reason why the nature of financial decisions vary from one firm to the other is that the nature of financial decisions is done what? Is influenced by the prevailing microeconomic and macroeconomic conditions. Macro and micro. Microeconomic and macroeconomic conditions or factors. Microeconomic conditions, macroeconomic conditions. Now let's try and understand microeconomic conditions. Now, candidates, microeconomic conditions or factors are factors that are related or conditions that are related to the internal conditions of the firm. Microeconomic conditions are the factors that are related to the internal conditions of the firm. internal conditions of the farm. Now, the important among these conditions, these are the internal conditions. One of the internal conditions is the nature and size of the farm. One, nature and size of the farm. The nature and the size of the farm. The nature and the size, because we have small farms, we have large farms, we have private farms that are run by families, we have farms that are incorporated. So the nature and the size of the farm is an internal condition that will determine the financing decision that will influence the internal or the financing decisions of the farm. The nature and the size of the farm. 2, the level of risk. The level of risk. And this can be established or determined by looking at the stability of earnings. Let me just put in stability of earnings. There are farms whose earnings are stable. There are farms whose earnings are not stable, not predictable. So the level of risk and stability of a farm is an internal condition, Number 3, liquidity. The liquidity position. The liquidity position. There are farms that are liquid, there are those that are not liquid. Asset structure. Number 4, asset structure is an internal condition. Asset structure. The asset structure of a farm is also an internal condition. The asset structure of the farm. The asset structure of the farm, as well as the pattern of ownership and the pattern of ownership. Asset structure and pattern of ownership is an internal condition which may influence financing decisions, Another internal condition or factor is the attitude of management. The attitude of management. The attitude of management. So let's discuss some of these microeconomic conditions in brief, starting with the nature and size of the farm. How is the nature and size of the farm? How does the nature and size of the farm influence financing decisions? Now, candidates, if a farm is engaged, for example, in manufacturing operations or in the provision of public utility services, its investment in fixed assets is large, and hence the capital structure has a large share of long-term capital. And the share, candidates, the share of long-term capital in the capital structure will also be large in farms that produce capital goods. On the other hand, in trading companies or concerns, a greater part of the investment is found in current assets. I'll give an example of a supermarket. A supermarket is most likely to have a larger part of its investment in stock, as opposed to, say, Toyota company, which engages in production of capital goods. So the investment of Toyota in fixed assets will be larger, and therefore the capital structure will have a larger share of long-term capital. But in trading concerns or companies who buy finished goods and sell finished goods. Those are trading concerns. They do not manufacture. So you'll find that a greater part of the investment is found in current assets. And with a greater ratio of current assets, the ratio of current liabilities also rises. And similarly, companies that are larger in size need larger capital. We are discussing size. We discuss the nature by looking at the nature. The nature could be, say, a manufacturing firm and a trading firm. That's the nature. Size, we have a small company and a large company. Companies that are large in size, companies that have, say, 1,000 employees, will need large capital. Even just working capital, paying salaries, paying rent, paying for office space, see, that will require large capital as compared to a small firm of, say, 5 employees. All right, a firm that has just 5 employees, that's a company that do not need large amounts of capital. Small firms may obtain their fixed assets just, say, on lease or hire, but large firms would need to construct their own buildings. They may need to assemble their own plants and so on. So small companies will have lower goodwill in the capital market, and so their financing decisions are different from that of larger firms. Larger firms will find them trading in stock exchanges and so on. And it is because of the lack of sufficient goodwill in the capital market that small firms are largely dependent on internal finances. And that is one of the reasons that their dividend decisions are different from that of large organizations. The dividend decision candidates, as we'll be studying later on, is also dependent on the earnings of a company. A company that relies on internal sources will have a different dividend policy from a company that gets its sources from, say, the capital market. Because if a firm gets its sources through maybe shares, then such a company is obligated to pay dividends to shareholders. But if a firm has generated these funds internally, then you see that company's dividend decision may be different. So you can see how the nature and the size of a firm, you can see how it affects or influences financing decisions. Then there is a level of risk and stability of earnings. Level of risk and stability of earnings. Candidate risk is another important factor influencing financing decisions, because the greater the risk, the higher the discount factor. And therefore, risk influences the long-term investment decision or capital budgeting decision. Again, if risk is higher or if income is not stable, Risk being higher means unstable income. Then the finance manager tries to impress the shareholders for more retention of earnings rather than adopting a liberal dividend policy. But with stable income, but with what? With stable income or lower risk. Because a company that has a stable income is a company that has a lower risk. So if the income is stable, in other words, if the risk is lower, the financial decision will be just the reverse. And in such a case, the fixed cost capital such as the preference shares and debentures may be preferred. All right? If a company has stable income, then that company can easily service loans, can easily pay interest on debentures, can pay fixed dividends to preferred shareholders and so on. So you can see how level of risk influences financing decisions. A company that has unstable income is a high-risk company because of the instability in earnings. Such a company cannot easily raise money through loans or debt. And the management may go for, say, internal sources. And if a company relies on the internal sources, that means that the shareholders may not be paid, because shareholders are paid out of earnings. If they are not paid dividends, then it means the money is being retained. So the dividend policy of such a company will be different from a company that has stable income. A company that has stable income can easily get sources from external sources, from debentures, from preference shares, from loans, and so on. Do you understand how the level of risk and stability of earnings influence financing decision? If you don't worry. If you don't understand what I'm talking about here, don't worry, because we shall be repeating what I'm talking here when we'll be discussing dividend policy decisions. We'll also talk about it when discussing capital budgeting decisions. So let us proceed to the third factor. We are discussing microeconomic conditions that are related to the internal conditions of a firm that influence financing decisions. Number 3, we have liquidity position. Liquidity position. This is the third factor that influences the financing decisions. And candidates, since dividend is normally paid out of cash, firms with a sound liquidity position adopt what we call a liberal dividend policy. But if in such cases the working capital requirements are very large, or the firm has to meet significant past obligations, then it will have to follow a conservative dividend policy. Conservative dividend policy. What do I mean? What do I mean when I say a firm having a sound liquidity position? A firm that has a sound liquidity position is a firm that has at its disposal cash. Liquid is just money. A company that has financial resources that are in monetary terms. That's a firm that is liquid. You may find a firm that is more liquid, another one is not liquid. Not liquid means a firm that does not have sufficient money of financial resources to meet its short-term obligations. A firm that is unable to meet its short-term obligations is a firm that can be described as having what we call unsound liquidity position. A firm that has at its disposal sufficient money to meet its short-term obligations is a firm that has a sound liquidity position. Do you understand, candidates? So, candidates, because dividends are normally paid out of cash, firms with sound liquidity position can adopt a liberal dividend policy. Liberal dividend policy means that a firm that distributes its earnings to the shareholders in form of dividends. Liberal, easily pays out of earnings, pays dividends. A firm that adopts a conservative dividend policy is a firm that instead of paying dividends, the firm uses these earnings to finance its obligations. All right? The working capital requirements. If the working capital requirements are very large, working capital requirements would relate to things like payment of salaries, payment of maybe trade receivables, paying debtors, paying the day-to-day expenses, buying inventories, raw materials. Those are working capital requirements. If the working capital requirements are very large, then a firm may adopt a conservative dividend policy. A firm will choose not to pay dividends. That means a firm will use this, the little cash at its own disposal to finance. Remember, we are talking about financing decisions. And this financing decision would also relate to financing of the working capital requirements. So the liquidity position of an organization can influence the financial decisions. Then moving on to the fourth internal condition, or what we are calling the microeconomic condition, is the asset structure and pattern of ownership. Again, candidates, in a closely held company where the ownership is in few hands, the management does not find it difficult to persuade the owners to accept a conservative dividend policy. Now, I'm repeating, candidates, a conservative dividend policy is a policy where the company chooses not to pay dividends to the shareholders, but retains the money for financing of the projects of the company. A company that adopts a conservative dividend policy is a company that chooses to use the internal sources of finance to finance its projects instead of paying dividends. So if pattern of structure, we're talking about pattern of structure. If a company ownership is in few hands, if it's owned by, say, 2 people or 1 person, then it becomes easy for management to convince this 1 person to hold on until the company's finances are stable, to hold on until the company can maybe have enough cash to pay earnings. It's very easy to persuade a small group of people to accept a conservative dividend policy in the interest of the firm. But in cases where there are many shareholders, where there are many shareholders, 1,000 shareholders, then their wishes also matter considerably. It's not easy to convince 2,000 people to hold on. It's not easy to convince such a large number of owners to accept a conservative dividend policy, because these many owners have varying needs, they have varying wishes, and their wishes matter considerably. So the asset structure and the pattern of ownership influences financing decisions. Then lastly, there is the attitude of management. Now, how does attitude of management influence financing decisions? Attitude of management. Here we are referring to the attitude of management in relation to things like risk. Now, a conservative finance manager will attach greater importance to liquidity rather than to profitability. On the other hand, an aggressive finance manager will stress on profitability and not liquidity. A conservative finance manager is one who does not take higher risks, because to attain high profitability, then it means that one has to engage in risky projects, to undertake risky projects. That's kind of endeavors are not pursued by conservative finance managers. Conservative finance managers would rather go for liquidity, holding cash rather than investing in risky projects. But an aggressive manager would go for risky projects in order to attain high profitability. For example, a conservative manager attempts to tread on what we call a beaten path. That's a conservative manager, will not go into new ventures, risky projects, no. Such a manager will prefer to avoid the fixed obligations for raising additional capital. Even when debt is advantageous, such a manager will shy away from debt. And the preference is to maintain a large volume of current assets. All right? A large volume of what? Current assets. But an aggressive finance manager is one who is ready to bear risk that is involved in debt financing. Because for a company to undertake new risky projects, then a company may need to raise money, and that money may have to be raised through debt. So you may find such a manager getting involved in debt financing and or involving himself in having low current assets. But we can say here that a prudent manager is one who would prefer a compromise between risk and return, or between profitability and liquidity. So the attitude of the manager can also influence the kind of financing decisions that are taken in a company. Do you understand? There are managers who are aggressive, that is an attitude. There are managers who are conservative, that's an attitude. So a conservative manager will prefer holding current assets, holding cash, maintaining high current assets. An aggressive manager is one who may go for risky projects in order to attain high profitability for the company. So you can see that the attitude can influence the kind of financing decisions that are made in a company. So candidates, that will bring this lesson to an end. We just introduced the financing decision. And at the beginning, I mentioned that the financing decision is one of the crucial decisions that are made by financial managers. If you are a finance manager, then one of the main roles that you will play is helping the company make the financing decision. And we've, in our today's lesson, introduced the subtopic on the nature and objectives of financing decisions. We've said that financing decisions can be influenced by microeconomic conditions and macroeconomic conditions. In our today's lesson, we discussed the microeconomic conditions that affect or influence financing decisions. We discussed 5 factors. The first one is the nature and size of the firm. Number 2, the level of risk and stability of earnings. Number 3, liquidity position. Number 4, asset structure and pattern of ownership. Then lastly, the attitude of management. I'll leave you with an assignment. Discuss 5 microeconomic factors that may influence the financing decision of a firm. I repeat, discuss 5 microeconomic factors that may influence the financing decision of a firm. Make sure the assignment is done before you attend our next session. Thank you. God bless you. I remain yours truly, Philip Deda Sagwa. Bye-bye. Greetings to you all and welcome to the lesson. The subject is financial management. During the last lesson, I introduced the new chapter on financing decision, and we began by studying the nature and objectives of financing decision. During that lesson, we said that the nature of financial decisions varies from one firm to the other. We said that it may also be different for the same firm over a period of time. And the reason being that the nature of financial decisions is influenced by the prevailing microeconomic and macroeconomic conditions. We went further to study 5 microeconomic conditions. 5 microeconomic conditions. Microeconomic conditions. We discussed 5 microeconomic conditions, beginning with the nature and size of a firm, nature and size of a firm. We discussed how the nature of a firm influences the financing decision. We also discussed how the size of a firm can influence the financing decision. During that lesson, we also discussed how the level of risk and earnings. We discussed how the level of risk and earnings may influence the financing decision of a firm. The other factor is liquidity position. By now, candidates, you know how liquidity position of a firm can influence the financing decision of a firm. Number 4, asset structure. The asset structure and what we called the ownership, the pattern of ownership and pattern of ownership. Then lastly, we studied how the attitude of management can affect the financing decision of a firm. These are 5 microeconomic factors or conditions. That's what we covered in our last lesson. In today's lesson, I want us to now focus our attention on the macroeconomic conditions. Macroeconomic conditions. Macroeconomic factors or conditions. These are conditions that may influence financing decision of a firm. The macroeconomic conditions, candidates, are the factors that are beyond the control of the management. These are environmental factors that are beyond the control of the firm's management. Unlike the microeconomic conditions, which we said, these are factors that are internal to the organization. These are factors that can be influenced or they can be controlled by the management. On the other hand, macroeconomic conditions, these are conditions or factors beyond the control of the firm's management. They are beyond control. They are external factors. All right? An example is, say, the state of the economy. One factor is the state of the economy. The state of the economy. The state of the economy. How can the state of the economy influence the financing decision of a firm? Remember, we are discussing the macroeconomic factors that have an impact on the financing decision of the firm. Now, candidates, we know that the state of the economy changes from time to time. And therefore, the financing or the financial decisions of a firm should also conform to such changes. The economy changes from time to time. And if the economy changes from time to time, that means that the financing decisions that are made by a company will have to change in order to conform to the changes in the external environment. For example, when the economy is growing or it is proceeding towards recovery, the finance manager should be eager to avail investment opportunities. But when the economy is facing a slump, then the finance manager should proceed with care. When the economy is on a downtrend, then that means the finance manager should shy away from investing in new projects. So this economy could be recovering or growing. Economy can also be slowing down, what we are calling a slump. So those two economic conditions, the state of the economy, can affect the financing decisions of a company. All right? And candidates, when the economy is facing a slump, it would not be advisable to go for an expansion program, because an expansion program would call for sourcing of financing, say, from debt. So when the economy is not doing well, when the economy is on a downtrend, then the finance manager should avoid investing in new projects. The finance manager should do what? Should shy away. The finance manager should avoid expansion programs. Okay? State of economy. Now, on the other hand, candidates, when the economy is experiencing an uptrend, then the finance manager can opt for trading on, say, equity. Why? Because larger profits are assured. When the economy is doing well, then the finance manager can choose in raising capital through equity, because the profits in such an economic state of affairs, profits are assured. But in terms of downtrend, then the stress should be on internal financing. When the economy is in a slump, then it's not advisable to seek financing from external sources, because internal sources of capital are cheaper than the external sources. So when the economy is, a company is operating in bad times, okay, in times of downtrend, then the stress should be on internal financing. And again, candidates, during an uptrend, during what? During an uptrend, higher dividends can be declared. Higher dividends can be declared. But during a downtrend, then a conservation of cash is necessary. And therefore, strict dividend policy should be followed. Do you understand? Do you understand, candidates, how the state of the economy can affect financing decisions? I'm saying here, can declare dividends. But when the economy is not doing well, the company should, instead of paying dividends, the company should have what we call a conservative dividend policy. A conservative dividend policy is where now a company shies away or fails to declare dividends. Instead, the earnings are used to finance